Hey, I'll see you on tour in Las Vegas, Chicago, and Grand Rapids. In Chicago, it's stand-up and a live panel show. Go to jimmydore.com for a link for tickets, and make sure you go to jimmydore.com. There's an article written by the one and only Whitney Webb at a limited hangout. It says, the man behind Trump's vice president pick, it's worse than you think. Because here's what I was thinking about J.D. Vance. This is the Teamsters president. This is what he had to say about J.D. Vance. First of all, he's got great initials. But here he is on the Teamster president talking about J.D. Vance and how workers support him.
J.D. Vance, the short time that we've worked together, I mean, he's been great on Teamster issues. He has co-sponsored an airline manufacturing bill that addresses outsourcing of critical airline maintenance to China. He's also supported paid sick leave for our railroad workers. If you remember that situation a couple of years ago, where they weren't getting sick time, he stepped right up. He's also been very vocal and supportive of holding employers accountable who try and skirt their obligation under an independent contractor model known as DSP. So he's been right there on all our issues. We've publicly stated it. And look, at this day and age, there's nothing better than
So that's what the Teamster president said about J.D. Vance. Here's what Glenn Greenwald said.
In this speech on YouTube, if you want to understand J.D. Vance's thinking, I really encourage you to go watch this. It is a well thought through speech intended to express his ideology about the Republican establishment, the Democratic establishment. But here is one passage that I found very telling and very interesting.
Senator Mitch McConnell was elected literally the year that I was born. And Mitch McConnell is extremely confident about nearly every single foreign policy view that he holds, despite the fact that he's been a senator since I was born, and nearly every foreign policy position he's held has actually been wrong. Okay. So whatever your views, if I can impart something really, really important to you or anybody else who's listening on social media or otherwise, it's that we have to be open to new arguments. When people say something that challenges our preconceived notions, if your response is to sort of think about it, that's good. Whatever conclusion you ultimately come to. If your response is to kind of seize up and immediately repeat the slogans that we've all heard for the last 4 years, you are part of the problem. And we have to beat back the problem if we're going to fix what's going on in the country. So let me sort of articulate two, and this is not meant to be a full scale or full.
So that was interesting that he's against Mitch McConnell. Here's one more thing about the Ukraine war and J.D. Vance.
Here, Fox News in October of 2023 reported this. Republican senators introduced a standalone bill to aid Israel without more funding to Ukraine. Quote, Republican lawmakers oppose combining Ukraine and Israel aid. Republican Senators Roger Marshall, Ted Cruz, J.D. Vance, and Mike Lee introduced a standalone bill to funnel aid to Israel without tying it to Ukraine aid on Thursday. The bill, called the Supplemental Appropriations Act, is an alternative to President Biden's $106 billion emergency supplemental bill he requested from Congress last week. That was the bill that we covered. Now, obviously, J.D. Vance is a supporter of financing Israel's military and its wars. I would say you probably can't survive in Republican politics without taking that view. Certainly, Trump has that view. Joe Biden has that view. Kamala Harris has that view. And I've made my views of that very, very clear. That's obviously a place where I vehemently disagree with J.D. Vance, to put it mildly. But given the alternatives that Trump had to choose from in the Republican Party, he could have obviously gone with some hardcore Trump follower like Matt Gaetz or Margaret Taylor Greene or Carrie Lake. And I think there, from a political perspective, that would not have been wise, because that really would not have expanded the appeal of the Republican Party. J.D. Vance not only will, for obvious reasons, but also there is a genuine record of him defending the kind of anti-establishment populist politics that got Donald Trump elected in 2016. We'll see throughout the campaign exactly how he articulates that. He's obviously going to be constrained by what Trump supports, and then obviously, in a lot of ways, this vice presidential pick is even more important than usual, given that Trump's age makes it highly unlikely that he could go beyond 4 years, and beyond that, he would be term limited. But there's also a chance, given Trump's age, that he wouldn't make it through the 4 years. And symbolically, certainly, this is Trump taking this movement that more or less he has single-handedly brought into the mainstream. It was bubbling in Republican politics for a long time, but he was able to articulate and sell it. And he's essentially naming his successor. That's the significance of J.D. Vance being so much younger, from that next or even 2 generations removed from Trump. And so I do think J.D. Vance's selection is more important than the usual vice presidential selection. And I think deconstructing his actual ideology as reflected in his actions and votes and bills, not just in his rhetoric, is more important than ever.
So back to Whitney Webb. She says the man behind Trump's VP pick, it's worse than you think. While J.D. Vance has his own controversies, his close connection to billionaire Peter Thiel, who is poised to have unprecedented influence in the new Trump administration, should deeply unsettle every American who cares about freedom, privacy, and reigning in the surveillance state. Now, I read this article, and I'm just going to read you a little bit of it. It is a pretty jarring article, to say the least. And it certainly damped down my enthusiasm for the JD. After the recent revelation that Donald Trump has selected J.D. Vance as his vice president, public attention not only turned toward Vance, but also to billionaire Peter Thiel. Vance has been one of the several prominent Thiel proteges whose profile has risen in recent years, with other proteges of the PayPal co-founder, including OpenAI's Sam Altman and Andrew Palmer's Lucky. Recent reports have also noted that Thiel first recruited Vance into his circle while Vance was still a student at Yale Law School. Shortly thereafter, Vance joined Thiel's investment firm Mithril Capital, where he worked for 2 years before joining Revolution Ventures. Vance played a major role in Revolution's Rise of the Rest seed fund, whose major investors included Amazon's Jeff Bezos and the Walton family of Walmart, who boast long-standing deep ties to the Clinton family. Vance later launched his own venture capital firm, Narya Capital, in 2020, which was heavily funded by Thiel, as well as former Google CEO Eric Schmidt, who we know is a CIA buddy, and was very much involved in the lockdown. Okay, so it gets worse. Both Schmidt and Thiel are key members of the steering committee of the controversial closed-door and overtly globalist Bilderberg Conference. Newsweek once called Schmidt and Thiel the two most influential figures at Bilderberg. Thiel has donated heavily to Vance's political career, giving $15 million to Vance's successful Senate bid in 2022 election cycle, in what was then the largest donation ever given to one Senate candidate. Thiel also joined Vance, a former Never-Trumper, on a visit to Trump's Mar-a-Lago, where Vance successfully won the former president's blessing. Thiel also connected Vance to other members of the so-called PayPal mafia, like David Sachs, who donated $1 million to Vance and hosted a fundraiser for him. Sachs, along with PayPal co-founder Elon Musk, were allegedly a key factor in Trump's selection of Vance as vice president, as they ran a secret lobbying campaign for Vance that also included media presenter Tucker Carlson. After leaving PayPal, Thiel would follow a similar path in creating another company, Pallantir. Now, we've talked about Pallantir here on this show. We showed you how they're doing what the CIA can't do legally, so they do it privately, and they are bragging about being able to surveil, stop social right-wing movements, things like that. Pallantir is the engine. Oh, by the way, we showed him just most recently at our live show, Al Karp, the head of Pallantir, said that it was really important to stop these student protests about Gaza, because if they win the intellectual battle over it, we'll never be able to send U.S. military out anywhere again. And so that was who this is. So Pallantir, Thiel founded Pallantir. Pallantir's, that guy, Alex Karp, is the engine on which the surveillance state runs. And soon after Vance was announced as Trump's vice president, it was reported that Pallantir co-founder Joe Lonsdale, as well as Pallantir itself, were backing a Trump-Vance super PAC called America PAC. So there they are. Okay, so now let me bring in the author of that article to fill in the rest of the gaps. Whitney Webb, she's been a professional writer, researcher, and journalist since 2016. From 2017 to 2020, she was a staff writer and senior investigative reporter for Mint Press News. She's a contributing editor for Unlimited Hangout and author of the book One Nation Under Blackmail, about the connection between the U.S. intelligence services, organized crime, and Jeffrey Epstein. Welcome back to the show, Whitney Webb.
Hey, great to be here. Thanks for having me.
So tell me, what's so bad about J.D. Vance's connection with Peter Thiel? And do you think that the money that Peter Thiel is giving to, it sounds like a stupid question as I'm saying it, do you think that the money that Peter Thiel has given to J.D. Vance is going to manifest in more surveillance state activity from J.D. Vance and Donald Trump?
Yes, I absolutely do. Not just because in general, politicians, when they're in office, and in contrast to what they say on the campaign trail, when they're in office, they do what their donors tell them to do. So I think that's what we're likely to see in a second Trump administration, particularly with J.D. Vance as the vice president. Keep in mind, Trump Peter Thiel was a major donor to Trump during his first campaign cycle, played an outsized role in his transition team as a result, and had major influence over people that were put in Trump's cabinet, particularly in the Pentagon, which led to an explosion of contracts between the U.S. military and Pallantir during Trump's first term, as well as other defense startups and military and intelligence contractors that are funded by Peter Thiel, which include Clearview AI, which is a facial recognition company, and Anduril, which was created by Palmer Luckey and Trey Stevens. Trey Stevens being a big part of Thiel's founders fund, and Palmer Luckey having been a Thiel fellow that sold his VR company Oculus Rift to Facebook while Peter Thiel was on the board of Facebook. And as far as JD Vance is concerned, JD Vance not only really owes his political career to Peter Thiel, he also owes his previous venture capital career to Peter Thiel, because it started at a Thiel-linked firm called Mithril Capital, and then after he went and joined the venture capital firm of former or the AOL co-founder Steve Case, the Rise of the Rest fund I mentioned earlier, and his current VC firm Narya Capital, he co-founded with another person that he worked with at Mithril Capital. And was largely funded by Peter Thiel, and Peter Thiel was the main bankroller of his initial Senate campaign, and subsequently was the person that brought him back into Trump's good graces after his, a lot of the quotes that have resurfaced recently about him being a never-Trumper and comparing Trump to Hitler and whatnot. So a lot of, essentially the person that did more than anything else to get JD Vance as vice president is Peter Thiel.
So you think that JD Vance went from being a never Trumper calling Trump Hitler to being his vice president, to being praising Trump and being his vice president because of Peter Thiel?
Yeah, Peter Thiel personally accompanied Vance to Mar-a-Lago and brokered that. I don't know exactly what you'd call it, sort of a smoothing over of what had previously been a rocky relationship. So I think absolutely Peter Thiel has been the guiding hand of JD Vance's entire career. And considering that Peter Thiel, when he was a donor last time, had an outside influence on Trump's policies, at least early on, and military policies, we're likely to see him be even more influential in a second term, not just because of JD Vance, but now after JD Vance was announced, you have, Pallantir itself and another Pallantir co-founder, Joe Lonsdale, giving heavily to the Trump campaign now that Vance has been selected as a pick. So these Thiel-founded companies Thiel-funded or founded companies have, since Vance was announced, have essentially signaled that they're all in on the Trump-Vance campaign. And this also includes Palmer Luckey as well, of the defense contractor Anduril, which is making a lot of unmanned drones and other, defense weapons. It's building our virtual border wall on the U.S.-Mexico border that Trump supports instead of a physical barrier that he used to campaign on. And they're also hugely involved in the Ukrainian conflict. So any sort of possibility of a second Trump administration winding down American aid to Ukraine, I think with Thiel in the equation, becomes questionable right away, because Anduril, Clearview, and Pallantir itself intimately involved with the Ukrainian military as it relates to the conflict with Russia.
Well,
so anything that would see their contracts or their bottom line as it relates to their involvement in that conflict, I think it's unlikely that it would whittle down significantly if Thiel has the influence that is to be expected in a second Trump term.
So do you think that is already... So that's depressing. Thanks, but
well, it's the uniparty. Both sides love war, and they love surveillance. So
do you think that? So Pallantir, which is Thiel founded, is making big money off Ukraine.
Yeah, they're majorly involved. They're also hugely involved in Israel's war on Gaza.
Right.
Supercharging the use of AI to murder innocent people. Under the, a lot of these Thiel-connected defense contractors claim that they're making war more efficient and sort of reducing the bloated military-industrial complex. But if their idea of efficiency is AI targeting, I mean, you can see, as has been demonstrated quite clearly in Gaza, that precise AI targeting still results in the mass murder of entire families.
So do you think that... So it was surprising to me, because Donald Trump seemed like he couldn't wait to become president again so he could end the Ukraine war, right? That like he knew he had like an ace up his sleeve and he knew how to do it. And the way you do it is you just threaten to you just tell Ukraine to accept the terms of a peace agreement, and then you try to work out the best, most favorable peace agreement for Ukraine, and then you move on with your life.
Well, it's possible, but look at what the Ukraine started. The Ukraine conflict started not long after the Afghanistan war ended. The national security state in the U.S. Maybe it will shut down one conflict, but it'll start another one soon after. That's why you have CIA involvement with the beginnings of the Ukraine conflict, because they had run out of their way to launder weapons and all sorts of money in Afghanistan, so they started Ukraine. So, if Trump is going to end the Ukraine conflict, he'd probably, start a war with Iran, which is oddly enough something that J.D. Vance, as soon as he was named nominee, despite his Quincy Institute speech where he claimed to be against going to war with Iran, was like, let's punch Iran hard. And he takes a lot of money from AIPAC. And if you're familiar with them, they've been, lobbying along with the Israeli government and Israeli intelligence for war with Iran for a very, very, very long time. And as what's going on in Gaza and Israel threatens to expand into a broader regional war, some of the companies that stand to benefit most from that are connected to Peter Thiel.
So my question was going to be, do you think that, well, of course, when Joe Biden pulled out of Afghanistan, it was Trump who actually negotiated that peace deal. And then Joe Biden decided to pull out and leave all our equipment behind. And the reason why he did that is obvious to someone like me and people who watch this show, because then that means that they have to buy all new equipment from the same people who manufactured that first set of equipment that were leaving there. $85 billion worth of stuff is what Trump said in his speech anyway. And so people started to pat Joe Biden on the back. Other YouTubers started to call themselves Biden bros, like demented morons. And, it's such a childlike thing to say over a surface. They can't look below the surface of what Joe Biden's pullout of Afghanistan was. And I said, well, wait. He's being allowed to pull out of Afghanistan by the military-industrial complex in Wall Street, which is who he serves. And what's he going to do with the money we've been spending on Afghanistan? I want to wait till he has an announcement to say he's going to invest it back in America. And of course, he didn't. They had another war waiting, which is what we've talked about on this show. They had the Ukraine war, which they've been ramping up since at least 2014, if not a decade before that, right? So that's why they allowed Joe Biden to end the 20-year war in Afghanistan and start this new war, which Joe Biden had just committed to another 10 years. So that'd be 12 years at least of Ukraine war. So I was, crossing my fingers that Donald Trump would end this Ukraine war, and he's more of a deal maker where he tries to find deals. But then he went. And he's credited with making sure this last round of funding went to Ukraine. So do you think that comes from J.D. Vance's influence and Peter Thiel's influence and the money that they gave to the campaign?
It's certainly possible, but there's any other number of reasons. Trump has many donors. Peter Thiel is just one of them. But with J.D. Vance, he's becoming increasingly influential, and he was very influential again during the first campaign. But it's important to keep in mind that a lot of the biggest donors to the Trump campaign are very wealthy Zionists and neoconservatives who try and conflate U.S. Foreign policy goals with Israeli regional policy goals. And there has, in Trump's first term, one of his biggest donor actually was Sheldon Adelson, who had tried to promote the idea of preemptively nuking Iran. And it was under Trump that Qasem Soleimani, the Iranian general, was murdered during a diplomatic mission that could have easily spiraled into a regional war, but it didn't. And they attempted to coup Venezuela, for example. In the Trump administration, John Bolton was his national security advisor. I think it's likely this time around, it's very possible he'll make similar cabinet choices. For example, there's calls right now for Trump to install Eric Prince as head of the Pentagon in his second term.
You know what, Eric
Prince
has
been going around on podcast appearance after podcast appearance. There have been tweets that have gotten tens of thousands of likes calling for him to be in charge of the Secret Service, if not in charge of the entire military. And this is very unsettling because he was a CIA asset during the Iraq War. His CIA handler was a man named Alvin Krongard, who's one of the major suspects in 9/11 insider trading and a former CIA deputy director. And of course, during Blackwater, while Blackwater was a contractor, sure, they weren't, Raytheon or whatever, but they killed untold number of innocent civilians and just wreaked havoc and engaged in extreme bad behavior that had extremely dire consequences for the countries where they were operating, and operated essentially as the CIA death squad in the Middle East. So the idea that this is the person that should lead the Pentagon because he wants to privatize our wars.
Yes.
Back during when the Ukraine conflict started, he was trying to privatize the Ukrainian war. Before that, wanted to privatize the Afghanistan war. So the answer to our imperial wars isn't to privatize them; it should be to end them. So but if you privatize them, it's going to be very lucrative for all these defense contractors. And the ones that are seeking to come up and dominate the defense contracting space are these firms like Anduril and Clearview AI and a lot of these other Thiel-connected defense contractors. But of course, there's obviously more in the mix than just them. But I think we should consider that there's more than meets the eye here. And once these people are in office, things change a lot compared to their campaign rhetoric. I mean, I would encourage people to go back and look at Trump's campaign rhetoric when he was campaigning for the first time in 2015 for the 2016 election, and what he actually did when he was in office, because a lot of people have forgotten.
Well, he said he was going to drain the swamp, and the joke that I did at that time was he drained the swamp, and what did he find at the bottom? His cabinet.
More or less, that's what happened.
So
he wants to put in Jamie Dimon potentially as Treasury Secretary.
I know. So
how is that populism? How are people acting like this is a populist ticket?
And that's
why maybe JD Vance has cloaked himself in rhetoric, and other things to be the person that sort of gives this populist anti-establishment wash to Trump. But we have to remember what happened last time and follow the money, because historically in American politics, that's what you have to do to know how things are actually going to turn out. And I would encourage people to be very vigilant about it. But as I noted in my article, one of the main reasons to be concerned about Peter Thiel is that the company he's made, Pallantir, is at the heart of the surveillance state, and including on the war of domestic terror. And some of his companies brag about targeting Trump supporters expressly. Clearview AI brags about helping law enforcement send people that were present at the Capitol on January 6th to prison.
Mm-hmm.
It's in their sales pitch. And this is a company deeply tied to Peter Thiel. And I think people should, look at the evidence and look at, again, follow the money. That's how you figure out how things actually work.
So one of Trump, so this is an irony, is that one of Trump and JD Vance's biggest donors has a video out that I think it's on YouTube even, that brags about using their software, their programs to identify January 6th protesters and put them in jail. It seems so crazy. And then they're all buddied up with this guy. And then, so just to get back really quickly, so Eric Prince, his big idea for, what his big idea for Gaza was, right? He had his big idea was to flood it with
and the Pentagon told him no.
Ocean
but
water.
Imagine if he's in charge of the Pentagon.
He wanted to flood all of Gaza, flood it. So that would flood the tunnels.
Kill everybody, basically.
So he would kill he would just make the whole place like a Noah's Ark flood. And that was his big idea, and he was upset that the Pentagon wouldn't let him do it. That's the guy that they want Trump to put it. Hey, I'll see you on tour in Las Vegas, Chicago, and Grand Rapids. In Chicago, it's stand-up and a live panel show. Go to jimmydore.com for a link for tickets, and make sure you go to jimmydore.com.